I used to believe birthdays were supposed to remind you that you mattered. As a kid, I imagined balloons, laughter, and parents who looked at you with pride. But in my family, birthdays had always been different. Mine were quiet, almost like an obligation. My younger brother Ryan's birthdays, on the other hand, felt like national holidays. Every year, the best gifts, the biggest cake, and endless praise somehow found their way to him. I spent years convincing myself it didn't bother me. Ryan just needs more encouragement. Mom would say, "You're the strong one, Ethan." Dad always added, "You don't need all that attention." Those words became the soundtrack of my childhood. By the time I turned 30, I had built a decent life. I wasn't rich, but I had a stable engineering job, my own apartment, and enough savings to think about starting a business someday. I had worked for everything I owned without asking anyone for help. Ryan, 27, had followed a very different path. He jumped from one job to another, spent money as fast as he earned it, and somehow always ended up back at our parents' house. Whenever he got into trouble, Mom and Dad rushed to rescue him. They called it support. I called it favoritism. Still, when Mom invited me to a special family birthday dinner, a small part of me hoped things might finally change. Maybe 30 was different. Maybe they had finally noticed everything I'd sacrificed. When I arrived at my parents' house that Saturday evening, the driveway was packed with relatives' cars. My aunts, uncles, cousins, and grandparents filled the backyard with cheerful conversation. A large banner read, "Family Celebration." I smiled to myself. Maybe this really was for me. Ryan walked over wearing a grin that stretched from ear to ear. "Happy birthday, big brother," he said, patting my shoulder. "You're gonna love tonight." "I hope so," I replied. Dinner was pleasant enough. Everyone laughed, shared stories, and enjoyed Mom's cooking. For the first hour, I almost forgot the years of disappointment. Then Dad stood up and tapped his glass. I'd like everyone's attention. The conversation stopped. Dad smiled proudly, not at me, but at Ryan. "Our youngest son has such a bright future ahead of him. We believe in rewarding potential." I frowned. What did that have to do with my birthday? Mom disappeared into the garage and returned holding a small velvet box, not for jewelry, but for keys. Car keys. Ryan's eyes widened. No way. Dad walked over and dropped the keys into Ryan's hand. "Congratulations, son. Your mother and I bought you a brand new SUV." The backyard erupted into applause. Ryan shouted with excitement and hugged both of them. "Thank you, this is incredible." My smile slowly disappeared. The applause echoed in my ears while I stood frozen beside my untouched birthday cake. It took several seconds before anyone seemed to remember why we had gathered in the first place. "Oh," Mom said with an awkward laugh, and "Happy birthday, Ethan." She handed me a thin envelope. I opened it. Inside wasn't a gift card. It wasn't even cash. It was a handwritten letter. Dad cleared his throat. I thought I'd read it aloud. Before I could stop him, he unfolded the paper. "Ethan," he began, "at 30 years old, it's time to stop playing life so safely. You need to take more risks, earn more money, start a family, and become someone people admire. Success isn't about being comfortable, it's about being exceptional." The yard fell silent. Every sentence felt less like advice and more like criticism. Dad folded the paper. "We didn't buy you a gift because we believe this lesson is worth more than anything money can buy." A few relatives looked down, clearly uncomfortable. Others forced polite smiles. Ryan jingled the keys to his brand new SUV, parked proudly in the driveway, while I stood there holding a lecture instead of a birthday present. In that moment, something inside me quietly broke. I realized I had spent 30 years trying to earn love that was never going to be given freely. I set the envelope on the table, looked at my parents one last time, and without raising my voice or making a scene, I turned toward the gate. Behind me, I heard Mom call my name. I didn't stop. For the first time in my life, I wasn't walking away from my family. I was walking toward my own future. The morning after my birthday, my phone buzzed nonstop. Mom called 3 times. Dad left 2 voicemails. Ryan even sent me a photo of himself standing beside his shiny new SUV with the caption, "No hard feelings, bro. Mom and Dad just wanted to motivate you." I stared at the message for a long moment before deleting it. Motivate me? No. Humiliate me? There was a difference. For years, I had convinced myself that if I worked harder, earned more, and became more responsible, my parents would finally see me the way they saw Ryan. But standing in that backyard with a birthday lecture in my hands while my brother drove away in a brand new car had shattered that illusion forever. I blocked their numbers, not out of anger, out of peace. For the first few days, I felt strangely empty. Every evening after work, I reached for my phone out of habit, expecting a family group message or one of Mom's weekly check-ins. Then I remembered there was nothing left to say. The silence hurt, but it also healed. Instead of wasting my weekends trying to win people over, I poured every spare hour into a dream I'd carried for years. I had always wanted to start my own engineering consulting firm, helping small manufacturers improve their production systems. I had notebooks filled with ideas, business plans, and sketches that had gathered dust because I was too afraid to fail. Dad's lecture echoed in my mind, "Take more risks." Ironically, those words became the only useful gift he'd ever given me. I resigned from my comfortable job. My coworkers thought I was crazy. "You've got great benefits," one of them warned. "What if the business doesn't work?" Another asked. I smiled. "What if it does?" The first few weeks were brutal. I worked from a tiny office I rented above an old printing shop. The furniture came from thrift stores, and my desk was an old wooden table I sanded and painted myself. There were days when I questioned everything. Some mornings the phone never rang. Some nights I wondered if my parents had been right about me all along. Then my first client signed a contract. It wasn't a huge project, but it paid enough to keep the lights on. A month later came another client, then another. Word spread that I was reliable, honest, and solved problems other consultants couldn't. Within 6 months, I hired my first employee. Within a year, I had a team of 8. By the end of the second year, our company had outgrown the tiny office, and we moved into a modern workspace overlooking the river. For the first time in my life, I wasn't surviving. I was thriving. One Friday afternoon, my business partner Maya rushed into my office, barely able to contain her excitement. "Ethan," she said, holding up a folder, "we got it." I looked up, the Harrison manufacturing contract. She nodded so hard she almost dropped the papers. "We beat 3 national firms." I leaned back in my chair, stunned. It was the biggest contract our company had ever landed, worth more money than I had earned in the previous 5 years combined. That evening, instead of celebrating with expensive champagne, I drove to the quiet hill overlooking the city. I watched the sunset and thought about the scared little boy who had spent birthdays wondering why he wasn't enough. He would never have believed this moment was possible. A few weeks later, I bought my first house. It wasn't a mansion, but it was beautiful, a warm brick home with a wide porch, a peaceful backyard, and a small workshop where I could build furniture on weekends. As I carried the last moving box inside, I smiled. Everything here had been earned, not given, not inherited. Earned. Around that same time, news about my family began reaching me through relatives. Ryan had totaled the expensive SUV after speeding through a rainstorm. Insurance covered only part of the damage because investigators ruled he had been driving recklessly. Instead of learning from the mistake, He financed another luxury vehicle, maxed out several credit cards, and quit another job after arguing with his manager. Mom and Dad quietly paid his bills again and again and again. An aunt called me one evening. "You know your parents are struggling financially now," she said carefully. "I heard they're helping Ryan a lot. I know." She hesitated. "They're very proud of your business, Ethan." I couldn't help laughing. "Proud, yes, they tell everyone how successful you are. Funny, when I needed encouragement, they had only criticism." Now that I had succeeded without them, they claimed my success as part of their story. I wished them no harm. But I also knew one thing with absolute certainty. If the day ever came when they needed someone to rescue them, they would discover that the son they overlooked had finally learned the hardest lesson of all. Love should never have to be earned by enduring disrespect. 3 weeks after moving into my new house, life had settled into a rhythm I had never thought possible. Every morning I woke before sunrise, made a cup of coffee, and sat on my back porch while the birds greeted the day. There were no lectures, no comparisons, and no pressure to prove I was worthy of love. My business was growing faster than I had imagined. My employees respected me, and for the first time in my life, I felt genuinely at peace. Then, on a quiet Tuesday afternoon, my office phone rang. The receptionist transferred the call. "Ethan," she said softly, "it's your father." I froze. I had blocked his personal number months ago, but he had found another way to reach me. For a moment, I considered hanging up. Instead, I took a deep breath and answered, "Hello." There was silence. Then I heard a voice I hadn't spoken to since my birthday. "Ethan." Dad sounded older, tired. His confident tone had disappeared. "Please, just one word." A word I had never imagined hearing from him. "We need to talk." I leaned back in my chair. What happened? Another long pause. "It's your mother and Ryan." I closed my eyes. Of course it was. Dad sighed deeply before continuing. "We're in trouble, son." The word "son" felt strange coming from him after months of silence. "What kind of trouble?" "Our savings are gone." I didn't answer. "We kept helping Ryan," Dad admitted quietly. "His business failed. Then he lost another job. He borrowed money from friends and from the bank." I listened without interrupting. "He promised he'd pay everything back," Dad continued, "but the debts kept growing." "How much?" Dad hesitated. "Almost $300,000. The number hung in the air. I remembered the luxury SUV, the expensive vacations Ryan had proudly posted online, the designer clothes, the watches. Every time someone questioned how he could afford them, my parents defended him. "He's finding himself." Now they were paying the price. "We mortgaged the house," Dad whispered. My heart skipped a beat. The house, yes. The same house where I'd spent years trying to earn their approval. The same house where I'd been handed a lecture instead of a birthday gift. "It's not enough anymore," he admitted. The silence between us grew heavier. Finally, Dad spoke again. "Ethan, we need your help." There it was, the real reason for the call, not because they missed me, not because they regretted hurting me, because they needed something. I looked out the window of my office at the employees working hard below. Everything I had built had come from sleepless nights, sacrifice, and determination. None of it had come from my parents. "What exactly are you asking?" I said calmly. "We need money." The words came out almost as a whisper. "If you could loan us enough to clear Ryan's debts." I couldn't help letting out a slow breath. "So I'm successful enough now." Dad didn't answer. I continued. "On my birthday, you stood in front of our entire family and told me I wasn't ambitious enough." Silence. "You said I needed to become someone people admired." Still silence. "You bought Ryan a brand new SUV while giving me a lecture." "I know." Dad said quietly. "No, Dad, I don't think you do. For the first time in my life, I wasn't raising my voice. I wasn't begging for understanding. I was simply telling the truth. I spent 30 years trying to be enough for this family. You are enough, he whispered. Now I am. Another painful silence filled the call. Then Dad surprised me. I failed you. Those 3 words carried more weight than any speech he had ever given. I thought pushing you harder would make you stronger. It didn't, I know. You pushed one son while protecting the other. He didn't argue. Because he couldn't, I kept believing Ryan would eventually grow up. He admitted, and instead, we stopped you from being a family. I finished. His breathing became shaky. I've had months to think about everything. So have I. Ethan, your mother cries almost every night. I closed my eyes. Part of me felt sorry for her, but another part remembered standing alone at my birthday party while everyone applauded Ryan. Pain doesn't disappear just because time passes. Dad, I said quietly, do you know what hurt the most? What? It wasn't the car. He remained silent. It was realizing that you celebrated his future while criticizing mine. A faint sob escaped through the phone. I'm sorry. It sounded genuine, maybe for the first time in years. Finally, he asked the question he'd been avoiding. Will you help us? I looked around my office, the company logo on the wall, the photographs of my team. The life I had built without them. After a long pause, I answered, I'll meet you on Saturday. Relief flooded his voice. Thank you, son. But listen carefully. Yes, I'm not coming with a check. The line went completely silent. I'm coming with the truth, and this time. Everyone was finally going to hear it. Saturday arrived with gray clouds hanging low over the city, as if even the sky understood the weight of what was about to happen. I drove to my parents' house just before noon. The place looked different. The flower beds Mom once cared for so proudly were overgrown with weeds. The white paint on the front porch had begun to peel, and the expensive SUV that had stolen the spotlight on my birthday was nowhere to be seen. I stood at the front door for a moment before knocking. Mom opened it. The confident woman who had always defended Ryan looked years older. Her eyes were swollen, and the smile she tried to force disappeared almost immediately. Ethan, tears filled her eyes. You came. I said I would. She stepped aside without another word. Inside, the house felt strangely quiet. Dad sat at the dining table, staring into a cold cup of coffee. Ryan was already there, his shoulders slumped, avoiding my eyes. For years I had imagined this moment. I thought I would feel victorious. Instead, I felt calm. Dad stood as I entered. Thank you for coming. I took a seat across from them. So I said, let's talk. Dad pushed a folder across the table. Inside were overdue loan notices, credit card statements, and letters from the bank. Their debts were real, and the mortgage payments were months behind. We're going to lose the house, Mom whispered. Ryan finally spoke. This is my fault. It was the first time I had ever heard him admit it. I kept believing the next business idea would fix everything. Every time I failed, Mom and Dad bailed me out. I never learned how to stand on my own. No one interrupted him. I thought I deserved everything, he continued quietly. The car, the money, all of it. He looked at me for the first time. I didn't realize what it cost you. I nodded but said nothing. Then Dad cleared his throat. We know we don't deserve your help. No, I replied honestly. You don't? The room fell silent. Mom lowered her head. I spent my whole childhood trying to earn your love. I continued. Every report card, every promotion, every birthday, I kept thinking that if I worked just a little harder, someday you'd look at me the way you looked at Ryan. Tears rolled down Mom's cheeks. But love isn't something a child should have to earn. Dad covered his face with his hands. I know, no, I said gently. Now you know. I reached into my briefcase and placed another folder on the table. Dad looked confused. "What's this? A financial plan?" He blinked. "I'm not here to pay your debts." Hope disappeared from Ryan's face. "But I am here to help you solve them." I opened the folder. "I've spoken with a financial advisor. If you sell unnecessary assets, negotiate with the bank, and stick to this repayment plan, you can save the house." Dad stared at the papers. "You already did this." "Yes." Mom looked up. "You're helping us. I'm giving you a chance." I turned toward Ryan. "But there's one condition." He swallowed hard. "What is it?" "From today forward, no one pays your bills except you." He nodded immediately. "I understand. If you want to rebuild your life, you'll earn it the same way I earned mine." "I will." I believed him. Not because he sounded confident, because he sounded humbled. Dad wiped his eyes. "We don't deserve a son like you." I smiled sadly. "You had one all along." No one spoke. After a long silence, Mom reached across the table and gently held my hand. "I'm sorry for every birthday we ruined. I'm sorry for every time we compared you. I'm sorry we made you feel invisible." Her voice broke completely. "We were wrong." For years, those were the words I had dreamed of hearing. Strangely, they no longer had the power I thought they would. "Because I had already healed without them, I forgive you," I said softly, "but forgiveness doesn't erase consequences." Dad nodded. "We understand." Over the next several months, my parents followed the repayment plan exactly. Ryan sold what he didn't need, took a steady job, and slowly paid back every dollar he owed. It wasn't easy, but for the first time in his life, he learned responsibility instead of entitlement. A year later, my 31st birthday arrived. There was no giant family party, no speeches, no expensive gifts. Instead, I invited a few close friends, my incredible employees, and my business partner, Maya, to my home. We laughed over a backyard barbecue, shared stories, and celebrated another year of life. Late that evening, my parents arrived with a small homemade cake. No luxury presents, no lectures, just a handwritten card. Inside, Dad had written, "We once thought success was measured by money and achievements. You taught us that true success is measured by kindness, integrity, and the courage to walk away from those who refuse to value you. Thank you for giving us a second chance. Happy birthday, son." I folded the card carefully and smiled. For years, I thought revenge meant making the people who hurt me suffer. I was wrong. The sweetest revenge wasn't buying a bigger house, earning more money, or proving them wrong. It was building a life so full of peace, purpose, and self-respect that I no longer needed their approval to feel complete. And as I looked around at the people who truly loved me for who I was, not for what I could give them, I realized something priceless. This was the first birthday of my life that truly felt like a gift, the end.